Hello and welcome to live commentary of the Apex Gaming $5,000 Modern Open. I'm Tandy, joined by Ross. Say hi, Ross.
Hi, Ross.
In today's event, we have roughly 61 players playing Modern, and we got a lot of new additions to the format over the last few weeks. Ross, why don't you give us a little bit of an idea of what people can expect from today's event?
Well, Rakdos Evoke still out in force, still the sort of the default best deck in the
Yeah,
format, the boogeyman of the format, and there are plenty of people playing it today. But there's been a new challenger on the rise in recent weeks, and that is Up the Beanstalk.
yeah.
The powerful little enchantment has found its way into a lot of different shells, all of them sort of reminiscent of the four-color Omnath deck. Some of them do play Omnath, some
Mm.
don't. So there's a bit of variance in build, but they're all trying to take advantage of Up the Beanstalk synergy with those Evoke Elementals, with Leyline Binding. A lot of powerful interaction.
Yeah. I don't know why we got handed this card, but this is sitting on our director's desk, and I'm assuming it's because he's been playing this card, and it's pretty powerful. So there's a couple different ways you can take this card. Up the Beanstalk. Can we get it on screen? Is that something we can do on this scene? So Up the Beanstalk, obviously 2-cost green enchantment, draws a card when it comes into play. That's the huge thing, right? It automatically replaces itself. A lot of cards in the past like this have not replaced themselves and have been something you kind of build around and push towards as the game progresses. The fact that it replaces itself means it's not costing you a resource worth of investment, which means that everything after the initial is all payoff. And when you're pairing it with cheap or free interaction like Solitude, Leyline Binding, and Fury, you're able to essentially interact with your opponent's stuff while breaking even or gaining on cards. And we've just been seeing tons of different strategies built around this.
Yeah, it's just a series of good trades at that point, and you run your opponent down to effectively no resources, and then kill them with whatever is remaining, and then eventually you find the second Up the Beanstalk, and the snowball keeps rolling down the hill and getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and we've seen the more traditional like control decks that are playing Beanstalk, just kind of slotting it in there. But we've also seen these like Turbo Cascade decks, from one Aspiring Spike on stream over the last few weeks, where he's really pushing the narrative of things like Elder Deep Fiend and Sun Scour and these like extreme pitch spells that are all being fueled by one or multiple Up the Beanstalks.
Yeah, pushing the shell to its limit,
Right.
really, stress testing it and finding exactly how far you can push that theme. So
I'm gonna need you to look up something today. I need you to
yeah,
look up how many Eagles of the North there are in the tournament.
I can figure that out. It's gonna take a round or two, but
Yeah,
I'll
that's
let you
fine.
know. Don't worry.
Yeah,
I know Ryan Hayes has a couple in his deck.
that's good. So I've been toying with the deck a good bit over the last few weeks as well, and not having enough white cards to pitch to Solitude, I think, is somewhat of a problem. And Lorien Revealed was in these decks as something you could pitch to like Force Negation or Subtlety in the more traditional 4-color Omnath builds. But now with Up the Beanstalk, you need to increase your mana cost a little bit with these interactive pieces. And I think you just need to have the colors of spells in your deck to match. And Lorien Revealed
Yeah.
is blue. That's just like not where you want to be.
And you also just don't need the card advantage from hardcasting Lorien
Right.
Revealed at this point.
Yeah.
Turning it into a draw six is cool and all, but really sort of overkill at that point. So
All right. Well, we have players seated in the feature match area. Let's talk a little bit about the matchup we're going to be watching in round number one. We got Danny Bambino playing a Grixis mid-range deck featuring Shielder of the Apocalypse as well as tons of cards printed in the last few years. This is like a good card Grixis with Ragavan, Orcish Bowmasters, now the unbanned Preordained. This deck looks fire.
yeah, 4 copies of the One Ring in addition to those Shieldreds, a couple Murktide Regents, a couple subtleties, and then a lot of interaction.
Oh yeah.
It's
Bolt, Counterspell. This is my jam.
yeah,
I love this stuff.
Force of Negation,
Yeah.
a couple fatal pushes for some early removal. So very much a good stuff Grixis deck, but a really very powerful deck. All these cards are good standalone cards. We've got good interaction. We'll see if it can stand up to the power of Beanstalk and Evoke over the course of the tournament. But for now, he's got a very unique matchup in round one in Living End.
Yeah, and his opponent Marciano is going to be on that Living End deck, and this is an archetype that has exploded in popularity over the last few years. The reprinting of Shardless Agent into Modern, I think, just reinvigorated a lot of these Cascade strats, and Living End is one of the default what things you can cascade into that has a significant effect. The only thing you really have to do is play cyclers, and we've actually gotten a lot of really powerful cyclers as well from the Lord of the Rings set. There's a bunch of one mana land cyclers like Generous Int that you can put into the graveyard for very cheap.
Yeah, Oliphant that also help you play through Blood Moon, find your
Right.
basic lands.
And just cheat on lands down to like 14 or
Yeah,
less, you
and
know.
increase your density of creatures so that you're constantly cycling through them and filling up your graveyard. I gotta say, if I'm Danny Bambino, I gotta feel pretty good if I'm playing a deck with cheap creatures like Rogovan and Orcish Bowmaster against the Cascade deck, a couple heavy hitters in Shielded and Murktide region, and then a lot of counter spells. 4 counterspell, 4 Force Negation, and a Spell Pierce in the main, a couple more counters in the sideboard. So I gotta feel pretty good, but Living End is one of those decks where if they get a really good draw, especially with their own Force of Negations and Griefs, there's sometimes just nothing you can do.
Right, and the one of the reasons why the Force Negations are so strong in that deck is even though you can only play it on your opponent's turn, Valen Outburst lets you initiate the challenge on your opponent's turn, and then your Force Negations are turned on and theirs are turned off. So that could be a huge turning point for this game.
This is just always one of the scariest matchups in Modern Living End. It has such a high ceiling. So, even if I like Danny's side of it, he's going to have to, mulligan aggressively, get the right cards, and, hope his opponent's draw isn't just completely unbeatable.
Right. All right. Well, the players are seated and ready in the feature match area, so let's head on down and watch round number 1 of the Apex Gaming $5,000 Modern Open.
Okay. We're giving the players a signal here to start. And
All
we're
right.
off.
Bambino on your left with that Grixis control deck will be on the play. No play on 1. Always want a Rogovan as your starter.
Yeah, especially in these Cascade matchups, they have very little interaction for it early, so it gives you a huge mana boost, huge tempo advantage, and that makes it easier to play your later threats while holding up the necessary counter spells to stop Living End. So no Rogovan here is a big win for Joe Marciano.
Yeah, Marciano gonna main phase fetch an untapped Steam Vent, so perhaps gonna pass back and just use it to cycle something, but it looks like we're gonna main phase cycle Curator of Mysteries.
Yeah.
And pass turn back.
Sometimes you main phase it now if you want to find the black card for Grief or Grief itself.
And to play around Orcish Bowmasters. You never want your opponent to surprise you with a Bowmasters and deal you an extra damage and grow their creature.
Yep. Always remember, kids, just because you can do it on their turn doesn't mean you want to.
Yeah, and nowadays there's tons of punishes, and heads up for Joe Marciano for understanding that already this early against the Bowmasters and go ahead and firing it off. Bambino going to cycle that Lorien Revealed. This is, a powerful 5-cost sorcery. Draws 3 cards. It's relatively tame, all things considered, but being able to land cycle for 1, going to get an island of any kind, gives you some insulation from your own Blood Moons, as well as just lets you play more physical spells for things like Force Negation that kind of count as lands.
Yeah, it has 4 Force Negation and 2 Subtlety, so plenty of reasons to get your blue count high in this deck, and then cutting the land count down to 20. So, even though this deck is playing a lot of long games, it's really going to be difficult for it to flood.
Gotta say, I'm a big fan of Bambino's build here, too. This is not something I've seen too much. I've seen the blue-black iteration of this strategy that is essentially the same deck, but just doesn't play the red cards, the One Ring, Counterspell, and Orcish Bowmasters, but adding Rogovan and Lightning Bolt and some other red cards seems like is giving it that aggressive slant that it likely needed.
Yeah, it gives a little bit more pressure. I agree. Definitely something that the Demir deck was lacking in.
All right, here's a Bowmasters, and Marciano going to get punished a little bit for cycling main phase, and Bambino going to deal an extra damage and grow that Orc army. Bowmaster is one of the most important cards from the Lord of the Rings set, giving punishes for decks against extra card draw, but also for 1 toughness creatures like Rogovan.
Hey, Marciano has the Grief here, only 1 counterspell. Got to imagine that that's the take.
Yeah, Spell Pierce seems easy. Creatures that are in play are going to get buried underneath the Living End when it comes. Lightning Bolt, not that big of a deal, though. He is light on life, so definitely worth considering. But goes ahead and takes the Spell Pierce, and we'll see if Bambino can find enough to burn out Marciano before he's able to capitalize.
Yeah, a bit of a painful mana base here for Marciano. A lot of early shocks, and that means, just getting extra punished against this Bowmaster.
Yeah, and he main phased the cycle as well, so now he's going to take an extra point of damage from that Bowmaster attack. So seems like he knew to cycle on one main phase, and then on two after the Bowmaster is able to be played, should maybe wait till the end step so he just takes less damage. But was digging for something for the grief, I think, and that's why we saw him do it that last turn.
Yeah, now interesting choice for Danny. Does he want to get aggressive here, smell blood in the water, play the other Bowmaster from hand to pump that Orc army even further? That would, that would make this a two-turn clock. I think it might be a two-turn clock regardless, because Marciano's going to fall to 8 here. If we play the other Bowmaster on end step, we ping down to 7, but then we only attack for 6, but we got the bolt to finish off.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so no need to get aggressive. We've got enough reach to end the game next turn, so the question is now on Marciano's side. Does he have the living end here?
Yeah, does he have the living end, and does Bambino have a top deck counterspell? And right now, it seems like Marciano does not have the living end because he started reaching for one land to cycle something. He's going to play a tap Stomping Ground and pass back. Bambino has lethal here. Let's see if he goes for it. We're going to go EOT Bowmaster, deal 1 to you. Does Marciano have the answer? Subtlety or something similar is necessary. We just have a cycle of an Architect of Will. We're going to take 1 from the Bowmaster that's in play.
And now this is lethal even without the bolt.
Right.
And Marciano had the force negation that could have potentially countered Bolt if Danny got antsy and played it on his own turn. But now that's just unnecessary.
All right, and Bambino with that not so aggressive start, but a lot of damage from Marciano off his own lands, and the Bowmaster just turning up. And game 1 goes to Bambino's.
Yeah, I think Marciano gave a little bit unnecessary damage to those Bowmasters. Maybe could have lived a turn, but the Bolt was going to be a big deal.
All right, as these players are reaching for their sideboards, they're going to take a look and see how best to incorporate those sideboards for game number 2. And as they're doing that, I'm going to have Ross go over each of these players' sideboards and give his best take on what he thinks is going to happen.
So, looking at Marciano's first, I see 2 Subtlety, 2 Foundation Breaker, 1 Brazen Borrower, 3 Endurance, 2 Force of Vigor, 1 Mystical Dispute, and 4 Leyline of Sanctity. I definitely like the Mystical Dispute against a heavy counterspell deck, but unclear how much Joe is going to be able to know of Bambino's list. So, we'll see if that comes in. I imagine it will.
Mm-hmm.
If you see Spell Pierce, you got to expect other counterspells.
Yeah, actual counterspell is the one.
Yeah. The other one that I would think about is Endurance. This is a Ragavan Bowmaster deck. Endurance could really play some good defense and buy you a lot of time in this matchup, but I'm not sure if that's the way he wants to go about approaching it.
Yeah, I think either is fine. The Endurance does allow you to play a more fair game plan, but I think maybe leaning into the fair game plan is difficult against a deck with so many counterspells. So I would likely just be hardcore combo and with the Mystical Disputes for protection.
Yeah. And then lastly, there's the Foundation Breakers. You've always got to consider bringing those in because Chalice of the Void can really be in any sideboard.
Yeah, Chalice of the Void is problematic. It's one of the reasons why you've seen an uptick of Flame of Venor out of things like Rhinos, and maybe it's something that these Living Index should adopt as well.
Yeah. And then looking at Bambino's sideboard, I see 2 copies of Engineered Explosives, 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Stern Scolding, 2 Dress Down, 1 Stone of Eric, 1 Chalice of the Void, 1 Unlicensed Hearse, 1 Alpine Moon, 1 Blood Moon, 1 Brotherhood's End, and 1 Damnation. Definitely like the 2 extra Spell Pierces. Definitely like the artifacts, Stone of Eric, Chalice of the Void, and Unlicensed Hearse, all disrupt the Living End deck, so those are excellent options. I would also consider the Damnation. That could effectively undo a single copy of Living End. You might have room for it because you're probably cutting a lot of this removal in the main deck. There's 4 bolts, 2 pushes, and a Shielder's Edict, so you've got 7 cards you can pretty easily take out. There, and even the subtleties are not particularly good in this matchup too. So I think you'll have room for that. The one card that is often tempting against Living End that I think is no longer effective is the Blood Moon,
right?
Because of those land cyclers that you mentioned earlier. It's just so hard to catch them without any ability, without any counterplay.
Yeah, they're very easily able to get a forest, which allows them to cast Violent Outburst, which is the big deal because they're playing 4 Generous End. And they aggressively fetch Island with their lands, even though they're not playing Lorien Revealed.
Yeah, so just too hard to get them on that one, but still a very, very good sideboard for Bambino.
All right. Well, while these players are still figuring out how to sideboard, I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsors. Ultimate Guard is your TCG leader in TCG supplies. From the katana sleeves to the archive big deck box that can hold your commander decks and cubes. Make sure to check out Ultimate Guard's line of products at your local game store. And if your local game store doesn't have any Ultimate Guard products, well, ask them why. Shout out to Wings, etc. Grill and Pub. Ross and I were there last night having a meal, and we will probably have at least one more while we're here. It's always a good time. Great atmosphere with sports on the television, cold drinks, and good company. Thanks to Wings, etc. for sponsoring these events. And last but not least, G Fuel Energy Formula for long days like today, where we have 6 rounds of Swiss and 3 rounds of top 8 for 9 total hours of Magic the Gathering. G Fuel Energy will keep you energized and into those late hours of the evening. So thank you to G Fuel Energy Formula as well. So, do you know Danny Bambino personally? Is he?
I do not.
I don't either, but I've seen him on social media quite a bit, and I've watched him play. And from what I can tell, he is somewhat of an old school grinder, similar to ourselves. And game one, it looked like he was pretty in control the whole time.
Yeah, but Living End's been around for a while now in Modern, so no huge surprise here from Bambino's side of the table. He knows what his deck is trying to do, and he knows the best way to approach this matchup.
All right, players are taking a look at their opening hand. Going to see if they want to toss them back. What type of hands are you looking for to keep if you're on Joe Marciano's side? Is it just cycle living in and that's it?
Well, you also want the disruption. Especially in the post-sideboard games, you've got to expect things like Chalice of the Void, more counter spells, so you're looking more for your Griefs, your Force of Negations, your Disenchant effects for those artifacts.
All right, turn one, no play for Bambino. We're going to pass it back to Marciano, and we're going to cycle Generous in during the end set. Let's get Generous in on the screen because this green 6-drop seems out of place, all things considered, in like a constructed format. But all of these creatures and even the sorcery Lorien Revealed that can land cycle for just 1 mana really change the dynamic of these types of cards in constructed, because they are essentially a 1-cost way to search up a land while also being something later in the game. And in Living End, you're able to abuse the fact that it's a large creature.
Yeah, and you also are able to get shock lands in Modern, so there
Right.
are
Even Triumphs.
Yeah, so they effectively fix 2, 3, 4 colors in your deck, and that
Yeah.
is really nice. And Modern 3 or 4 years ago, it might have been too fast for you to spend 1 mana tutoring up a land. But these days, with all the cheap interaction that is available to players, especially those pitch elementals, Fury and Solitude,
Right.
it's a lot easier to spend a little bit of time getting your mana perfect, having this versatile card into the long game, because you've got cards that'll catch you up if your opponent is coming out of the gates quickly.
Yeah, I was always a big fan of Twisted Abomination. Did you ever play with that one?
Oh,
It
yeah.
was in like Standard or Limited or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
It's in there twice. Once during Onslaught in its original printing, but once again during Time Spiral block.
Yep, it was time
And
shifted.
and I loved that card. Being able to spend 2 early on to go get a swamp was great, and then later on you had this big baddie that had regenerate. And obviously these newer versions are a little bit more powerful because they cycle for cheaper, but the idea behind them is exactly the same.
Interesting, Marciano getting Overgrown Tomb there with the second end. That's a second Black Source. There's definitely a Grief in hand, so he might be playing a longer game here, going to hard cast the Grief.
Or even suspend the Living End. Sometimes you do that on turn 3, and then, well, you got a bunch of time before it goes off, and you might be able to overload your opponent in some way.
Yeah, this isn't a Teferi deck. You don't have to be worried about that. And suspending the Living End is a good way to play around soft counters, because when it comes off suspend, all your lands are going to be untapped, and you can pay for those.
All right, Bambino is going to flash in. Bowmaster's here at the end of his turn number 2, and in response, Marciano is going to fire off Living End. So my guess is he said your ability resolves, right? And then we're going to make sure we tag the token, but Bambino has the answer here. We're going to go Force Negation, pitching Murktide. This is still on Marciano's turn, so the pitch is on, and Living End is now gone. And we're going to go back Bambino's way, where he has pressure and untapped mana. This could be really bad for Marciano.
Yeah, Marciano made the decision there to play around potential Spell Pierce or counter spells, so plays the Violent Outburst on his own turn when Bambino is tapped out, but that plays into the Force of Negation. So, sort of caught in the squeeze there, had to pick what he wanted to play around, picked incorrectly.
Well, that's one of the beauties of Bambino's build. He has those Force of Negations to protect so he can tap out at various times, and then also has things like the One Ring to refuel, so he's not hurt so much by the pitch effect.
And once again, Marciano has dealt himself quite a bit of damage with his own lands. This is the first attack from Bambino that's gotten through, and Marciano's already down to 11.
Now, one of the downsides of playing in that 4-color mana base, the living index often punished by the more aggressive draws from the opponent. But here, I mean, we've only attacked for 2, you know?
Yeah, and I'm looking at Marciano's hand. I don't see a lot to recover. I see a Force of Negation.
Leyline of Sanctity, yuck.
Ooh, maybe, again, misdiagnosing the matchup. Bambino's list not that well known. Maybe thinking it was a discard matchup and not a counterspell matchup.
Yeah, maybe thought there was like blue-black evoke with Grief himself and maybe some of those reanimation elements, but we're way more of a normal control deck here, and we're playing Grief from hand as Joe Marciano for full retail, but one dress down able to shut it off completely.
Yeah, those were in the sideboard. I didn't anticipate them coming in, but as I said during sideboarding, there was a lot of removal to come out. And dress down is a pretty high ceiling card to bring in situations like that. So.
Well, the Grief's body does protect Marciano from the attack, so Bambino, no land and no play, going to pass it back Marciano's way.
Yeah, I see a Foundation Breaker in Marciano's hand as well, so a lot of disruption coming in from his sideboard, and it's sort of gumming up the works here.
Bambino going to take the 3 from the Grief attack. Could have chosen to double block, but values having those creatures in play, especially the punish for cycling by growing the Orc army.
Yeah, I think Bambino's got to think he's winning the race.
Right.
It's 6 attacks from the Grief from 17 life to kill Bambino. It's 6 attacks here, so technically slightly behind, but he is going to be a lot more apt to add pressure to the battlefield, and if Marciano ever cycles, it changes his clock.
Right. All right, going to take the 2 damage down to 9. Bambino, no land drop, going to pass back again, and Marciano going to go fetching during the incept down to 8.
Yeah, just as fetch changes Bambino's clock, so hopefully Marciano has something to do with this mana.
Well, like you said, he does have that Foundation Breaker, and he may just hardcast that as a 3/3 body. This is a 3/3, right? 4 cost.
I think it might be a 2/2.
You might be right. Evokes for 2.
Yeah, it's a 2/2.
Dang. I don't know that I've cast one myself from hand before. All right.
Yeah, I'm normally on the receiving end of Foundation Breakers.
No play during the incept was Marciano. We're going to go back attacking with the Grief. Bambino down to 8. And now Marciano, looks like we are going to go ahead and play. Oh, it's another Grief off the top. This is going to strip a card from Bambino if he doesn't have a counterspell.
And now Marciano can play offense and defense. 1 Grief attacks, 1 stays back. So we're getting a little bit more intriguing on the battlefield play in this game. Bambino thinking here, so he's got some sort of counterplay. Yep, decides to just use a counterspell.
The oldest counterplay in the book, counterspell. That's a nice one there. Looks like a F&M promo that's signed by Mark Poole. All right, we're gonna
that's some old school grinder cred there.
Yeah, no kidding.
The foil onslaught basics too.
All right, so after this attack for 2, Bambino misses yet another land drop. That means his hand is roughly 5 or 6 spells, all likely hard for Marciano to beat, but Bambino doesn't want to put shields down at any weird spot and lose to an instant speed living end, so just being very careful and cognizant of that. Attacks for 3 to Joe Marciano, Bambino down to 8. So Marciano's going to pass again.
Yeah, looks like the hand for Marciano is that Leyline, 2 Force of Negations now, the Foundation Breaker, and 1 I can't quite make out. Oh, is that Violent Outburst?
I believe so. So here comes Violent Outburst, and I think he also has Force of Negation, so this could be very bad for Bambino.
Has Force of Negation for 1 counterspell, also has the ability to pay for a Spell Pierce. So Spell Pierce isn't going to do it unless there's 2.
All right, so this might be enough for Marciano to take over this game. There are no creatures in Bambino's graveyard, and there's quite a few in Marciano's. It's going to be a light living in, but usually that's enough.
Yeah, it looks like a Grief and a couple generous ends, but Bambino's at 8. Even if one of the ends dies, it's still lethal with the other 2.
Okay, here is the Force of Negation. Or sorry, here's the counterspell, and that baits the Force of Negation. We'll see if Bambino has a response. And again, this is on his upkeep, so if this resolves, he's likely dead to the attacks next turn.
And because it's Bambino's upkeep, there's no pitch cast for Force of Negation available for him. Doesn't have enough mana for another counterspell. Has enough mana for a Spell Pierce, but Marciano's got the 2 to pay. So I don't really see a path out of here.
Yeah, it had to be some card that we know is not in
That
his deck list, like a Nyx or
that
uh,
counterspell should be exiled.
Surgical.
For
Well, the game's over, so it's fine.
I mean, he could have like land Murktide Regent. Oh yeah, and we see had the Spell Pierce, also had counterspell if he could have found a fourth land, but um, and if you're Marciano, you just take the Bowmaster here, and I don't think there's anything Bambino can draw. The Bowmaster could have bought him time by chump blocking the two. I guess the Ents have trample, right? So that's even.
Yeah, they have reach.
They've reached. Okay, yeah. So you could have chump blocked both Ents and lived. Ooh, Marciano taking the damnation.
Well, this is Bambino's upkeep. You definitely should have taken the Bowmasters because this is the last turn of the game.
Yeah. So
And
now
if he draws a
land
land, he has blockers.
into Bowmaster into then the One Ring buys you more time.
Right. So if you just take Bowmaster, I think it's impossible for
Yeah.
Bambino to get out. But afraid of that damnation, takes that, but still wins the game.
It's just another situation where Marciano is not exactly sure what is in Bambino's list.
Right.
We know Bambino's exact list. We know if you take the Bowmaster, there's nothing he can draw to stall for a turn. But if there is something he could draw to stall for a turn,
Yeah.
then and he draws a fourth land the next turn with the damnation, it could all become unraveled for Marciano. So, playing it safe from his perspective, just because he doesn't have full knowledge of the deck list that he's up against.
Got to play around darkness.
Yeah,
The darkness.
that's the
will
card
get
I was
ya.
thinking of too.
Yeah. Can we get darkness on the screen? You ever seen darkness before, Taryn? This is a really old card that they reprinted in Time Spiral, and
It's seen modern play before. They used to sideboard it in the ad nauseum combo decks.
yeah. So it's basically just fog for 1 black, and I don't. It wasn't even like color shifted, right? This is just an old card.
Yeah, it was time shifted. It was part of the time shifted
Right, but there were
old
color
border.
shifts and time shifts during that time period.
Yeah, time shift was in time spiral. The
Yeah.
color shifts were plane shifts. That was in plane shift.
Ah, right.
And then there were future cards with the different layout of the card in future sight. That's
Yeah.
where Tarmogoyf.
I'm still curious when we're going to the plane that has Metragenda Paraglyphs, whatever it's called. Miragenda Paraglyphs? The one that's like all your creatures that have no text on them get +3/+3. I want that. I want that plane, okay? I want mono colossal dreadmaws, and I don't want them to have
Dreadmaws
abilities.
trample.
Oh my god. Worst day of
You
my
need
life.
crawl
Crawl
worms.
worms.
Yeah,
Let's go
you
back to Dominaria.
you need crawl worms, Mons, Goblin Raiders, and Grizzly Bears. Maybe some Nessian Coursers.
Yeah. That's in course.
Goblin Hero.
Isamaru, Hound of Konda.
Yeah.
I know what plane that one's from. But that's a good no text on it.
Okay, going to game 3 here. Will be interesting to see how Marciano changes his sideboarding because he's seen more of Bambino's deck. He's now gone through 2 games and not seen any discard.
Right.
So I would guess that the Leyline of Sanctities come out.
Yeah, I think that'd be a nice little swap for Joe Marciano. We did see Leylines after game 1. The game 1 was pretty fast. All we saw was 2 Orcish Bowmasters, and the game ended.
Yeah, and if you see Bowmaster, you could reasonably think that Thoughtseize is there.
Right.
And so Leyline of Sanctity becomes appealing. But after not seeing it for 2 games, seeing a bunch of counterspells, you've now seen Pierce, Force, and counterspells. So you got to figure that this is a blue-heavy deck with blue-focused disruption, and so your Leylines aren't going to be as good. The other question, though, is if you went through that game and didn't see any of the artifacts, are you also going to assume there are none there and take out the Foundation Breakers?
Well, if you're a living in player, you have PTSD from playing against things like Chalice of the Void and Rest in Peace. And so if you don't bring your 4 Foundation Breakers with you, you are not a living in player.
Well, Marciano is a living in player, and he only brought 2 Foundation Breakers.
Well, I'm saying, if you don't bring in your disenchants, you're not a living in player.
Yeah.
Everyone has something.
And we do know Bambino has, a Stone of Eric, a Chalice of the Void, and an Unlicenser. So 3 different cards, but a total of 3 pieces of permanent-based hate. That's a nice number for this matchup.
All right, we're underway here for game number 3. Bambino going to be on the play, leads with Ragavan. And this is going to threaten 2 damage a turn with some treasure boosts. And Marciano doesn't have that many ways to deal with it. His deck doesn't really start doing anything relevant to the board until turn 3.
Yeah, Ragavan is excellent against these Cascade decks, especially Living End and the Glimpse deck, because they don't have as much early interaction as Rhinos.
Yeah.
So an excellent start here from Bambino. It's the first time we've seen the monkey in this match, and it came just in time.
Well, it's also important to note that while Ragavan's abilities here might not seem that good against living in. You know, taking a card off of their deck, you're not really able to cast Generous Int from
No,
exile
you're
very
not worried
easily.
about casting their stuff.
Right, but you are worried about getting treasure tokens, which allow you to play multiple counterspell type effects in the same turn and get through your opponent's disruption.
Yeah, we saw Bambino lost game 2 because he was a mana short of casting 2 copies of
Right,
Counterspell.
stuck on 3 land for
Yeah,
forever.
he is not going to have that problem this game.
All right, well, Ragavan attacks, gets a treasure, exiles a force negation, and we'll see if Bambino has anything else for turn number 2. Could just play land, say go. Most of his 2-drops are instant speed, whether it's Counterspell or Orcish Bowmasters.
And once again, we're starting with at least one fetch shock for Marciano, so already down to 15 after the Ragavan attack. Like, this is going to be a lot of pressure.
All right, another shock here, Steam Vents for Marciano. See what he wants to do with that 2 mana. Could cycle Curator of Mysteries. Looks like that's what we're going to do. See if Bambino wants to respond. We have a fetch. Tarn. Going to go down to 17 as Bambino. More than likely going to go get Watery Grave. And here comes the Bowman.
Yeah, Bowmaster ping will drop Marciano to 12. Then you're going to have a 2/2 Orc army, the Bowmaster itself, and the Ragavan. That's a 2-turn clock.
I don't know if it's Watsy cannon, but it's definitely my cannon. This is the Orc that killed Boromir. You know, he is clearly one badass orc, and it takes a badass orc to kill someone as awesome as Boromir.
Okay, I like the subtlety here for Marciano. Definitely buys him a lot of time by keeping the pressure off.
Okay, and that's going to put
And
Bowmaster back on top. We still draw a card off the Curator. We're still on Joe Marciano's turn, so we can cycle again while the shields are down.
the choice to put the Bowmaster on top is telling from Bambino's side. And hopefully Marciano has taken note of it, because if you didn't have Disruption for a living end, there's no way you can put the Bowmaster on top.
Right.
So he's got to have at least one counterspell, and given how confident he was about it, maybe 2.
Mystical Dispute revealed for Marcianos, so that means Bambino now knows that there's Mystical Disputes to worry about. That might get him to play a little bit differently in a turn or two.
What he doesn't know is that there's only one copy in Marciano's 75, so now there's definitely no Mystical Disputes to worry about.
All right. Bambino, Mana Light, once again, it seems, has the option here. He's thinking about main phasing the Orcish Bowmaster to punish Joe for cycling stuff. Oh, he does have the land. Okay. And we're just going to pass turn. 5 mana at the ready.
It's only a 20 land deck with 2 Lorien revealed and 4 preordained. Like, making 2 or 3 land drops and stopping is going to be pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
But those 2 treasures up top from the Ragavan will be very important.
All right, Marciano in the tank. I see a Violent Outburst hanging out.
Yeah. That'd be a good one to pick a fight on Bambino's turn, cut off some of the mana, then untap, go for it again. But Bambino has enough mana to play 2 or 3 counter spells because of all the treasures from the Ragavan.
Okay. Bowmaster comes in, deals 1. Marciano, let's see if he wants to fire it off now or give Bambino access to a bunch more mana. Okay, we're going to go back Bambino's way. Here comes a big attack for 2, 3, 4 damage coming in. This is going to put Marciano down to 6 in lethal range from a bolt and 1 more attack step or 2 bolts. Here it comes.
Okay. Marciano going to go to 6. Going to have to fetch down to 5 for that Misty, but should get 2 shots at trying to resolve a living end here. So the real question is, does Bambino have the counter spells to stop 2 living ends?
Yeah, has plenty of mana, so now we can even play. We can play 2 counter spells, 3 counter spells. We can play. We know the Mystical Dispute's gone, so we don't have to play around that. Okay, gonna go back Marciano's way after playing a land. And we'll see if Marciano wants to fire off this Violent Outburst now.
Interesting that Bambino would play the Steam Vents tapped. His life total not that relevant. I would think you would just want all your mana untapped for whatever unforeseen circumstance that might arise. Let's go to 15.
What if that's a sign that this living end is gonna resolve?
It's a small sign of weakness.
I agree. All right, we're gonna flip cards off the top.
At least
Until
one
we
of the lands
find
stayed
the
in.
living end. This is by design. The whole deck is built with these large cyclers and evoke creatures in mind. And then our Cascade spell will always hit Living End.
But the fun of Cascade is it's a different card every time, Todd.
Ah, yes. Ah, yes. Here's a counterspell from Bambino. That's 1 Living End down. We'll see if Marciano has the Force Negation here to protect. No, it's going to go to the graveyard. Outburst goes to the graveyard. Back Marciano's way. We got one more shot at it. Hand.
I think it's 2 Living Ends in hand.
Yeah, I don't think he even has another Cascader here, so I think Marciano is out of luck and out of time.
Well, he's only staring down 4 damage here. Well, decides to pack it in regardless, but... And there is a counterspell, another counterspell back for Bambino, so... I don't think he had any remaining outs, but it wasn't literally dead on the next turn.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it, Bambino. With that, Grixis mid-range deck does defeat Living End in 3 games.